Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of the Lodge podcast, brought to you by Interactive Ontario with help from Ontario Creates. I am your host, Scott Milley, and I am incredibly honored to welcome this week's guest, Shishir Pande. How are you doing today? What's going on?
Doing great. Really excited for our conversation today.
So he is an entrepreneur. He is a member of the top 20 under 40 in the London Inc. magazine and the CEO of EXAR Studios. So today we're going to talk about EXAR. We're going to talk about the possibilities, the benefits, and the future of the technology. And we'll see where it goes from there. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation. So the first thing I have to ask you is, how have you had 90 jobs in the last 10 years or so? Do you want to just bring that up a little bit about some of your experiences?
Yeah, I think it's probably a good space for me to talk a little bit about my history and sort of how I got into this industry, how I got into all of the other industries that I've sort of played in my little sandbox on over the course of the past 10 years. So I come from an electrical engineering background, which seems somewhat random because now we do software and we do art and we do XR, which has very little to do with power distribution, which was what I really focused on during my schooling.
As a refinery intern, I saw that. It's like, interesting.
Yeah,
Where you are now from there, I was like, I can't see the correlation and like how that lined up. I was like, I got to bring this up right off the top.
yeah. So that was actually an interesting experience for me, and I think it actually really shaped what I didn't want to do, which is kind of an interesting topic. When this was in third year of university, so I had just finished third year. I got picked up by Unilever to work as a refinery intern. In essence, what I was doing was keeping track of spreadsheets and making sure that a refinery uh, operated to the best of its ability.
Hmm.
And so I realized that that wasn't the direction that I wanted my career to go in. I wanted to be doing things that solved more challenging problems. Um, so that's when I got really serious about schooling. Up until that point, I was probably, a 60s student, just barely squeaking through every year of engineering. 60% was the cutoff, and I recall my average for the first 3 years was somewhere between 62 and 64%.
So like just hanging on by a thread. Yeah.
Just hanging on. And as soon as I went into that workplace, it flipped a switch for me because I realized what I wanted and what I didn't want. And that led to basically me being the type of person that I am today, where I cannot do one thing at once and I need to do many things. So the fourth year of university, I hit the dean's honor roll. I wrote 4 technical papers. I started a club to connect students with real world problems from real engineering companies. And so that was like 180 degrees. Um, I went from 60s to 80s and really started taking ownership over my own life and also my career. And
That's pretty
that's kind of.
inspiring though. I got to give you that. Cause like I think that's something that a lot of people don't, kind of take for granted. But it's like, I think you
Mhm.
can learn just as much. You learn more from mistakes than I think you do from successes. But I think you going in
Mhm.
there and finding out what you didn't want to do is just as powerful as going into finding
Mhm.
something that you are passionate about. Cause it's like the nightmare might be more inspiring and more like motivating than the dream, right? Where it's like, I know I
Yeah.
don't want to do this. I know I don't want to be here. So let's do
Yeah.
everything I can to make sure that I don't end up here and then I end up here.
Yeah. And my first job out of university was kind of a similar story, right? I went into engineering being excited, feeling that I was going to get to do creative work. I started working for General Dynamics as an electrical engineer. And I quickly realized that when you're in a field that's as regulated as like these government sort of things, the creativity gets kind of sapped out of the process
Mhm.
because you have to do something that's reliable, that's tested, tried and true, where my interests were always in how can I push the boundaries? How can I do more? And how can I do things that are innovative and new?
You felt it kind of like stifled your like creative mind.
Yeah, I would say it was the same process as with the refinery internship, where there was a period of time where I was learning new things and it was very exciting. But when I realized what the entirety of the role entailed, my excitement dropped significantly, and basically I went from a high performer to a low performer within that organization very, very quickly. Um, and after that was sort of like done, I basically started my entrepreneurship career. And funny enough, the first thing that I did was I started an organization to help people with career development. So I was speaking on the subjects of writing good resumes, marketing yourself for the job market, and those sort of things. And I also had my own podcast, which was something that you wanted to
I definitely
touch
want to get
on.
into that, considering the platform and considering where we are right now. That's
Yeah.
definitely something I want to touch on.
Yeah.
But you like briefly talked about being like the president and founder of Society for Engineering Application, which I thought was a really
Yes.
interesting thing. And you see that flip right from 2012 to 2013 of that
Hmm.
part clicking and saying, you know what, I don't want to just a sheep definitely isn't the
Coast.
right word, but you don't want to coast. Exactly. You don't want someone
Yeah.
else planning your life for you. And I think
Hmm.
that's shown throughout your career of co-founding and launching these new projects and, you know, getting that basis and then moving on and doing other things. And I think every position you've had has overlapped because
Hmm.
you're constantly ready for the new thing. So what
Hmm.
part, which we're going to get into a little bit more shortly, what part of XR kind of clicked that trigger for you where you were like, this is where I want to really hunker down and really like expand on where we are?
I think for XR, like, so I have to delineate XR, the company being EXAR, and then XR, the technology being XR, the letters. So EXAR was an exciting opportunity to be a part of an ever-changing industry. So when we look at XR technology, I'm not going to have the problems that I had with some of my previous roles where the excitement wears off because this it's just changing. Like nobody's figured it out. You know, there are new topics like the metaverse and NFTs and blockchain technology that all interconnect and overlap in this sort of XR space and have importance in how we develop the space over time. And I don't think that even in my lifetime we will solve the exact all of the problems associated with this field.
Yeah, it is incredibly exciting, and I think that was one of the
Mhm.
things coming into this episode, and I knew that we'd be talking. That I
Mhm.
originally, like, of course, when you're preparing for things like this, you want to do as much research as you can, and you want to make sure that, you know, if we have a developer on that we've played the game, and we want to be able to kind of catch up. And so I
Mhm.
had this little bit of a not panic attack, but a little bit of this nervous energy where I was like, oh well, XR and AR isn't really my field of expertise. I'm like, so it's
Mhm.
something that I really wanted to look into, and I actually brought that up to my partner, and she was like, well, who's your audience? Like, well,
Mhm.
a lot of people that are, you know, into technology, a lot of people that are into interactive entertainment in Ontario. And she's like, are they all experts in XR and AR? Like, no, I feel like some people know a little bit more, a little bit less. I'm like, I feel like I'm about average. She's like, well, then you're your audience. She's like, ask the questions that they would ask. So it made me feel much
Yeah.
better about the whole situation. I was like, all right, we can
Yeah.
actually kind of get into that like rudimentary conversation of
Mhm.
XR and then kind of get into the applications of it,
Yeah.
which I think is going to be really fun. But while we're here, I do actually really want to ask you about your podcast experience because you brought that up to me when
Mhm.
we had our little prelim conversation, and I went, "This is
Yeah.
perfect. I love this. I want to hear from you. Why did you launch it? What was it
Yeah.
about? And what did you take away and learn from it?"
Yeah, I would say during that period of time, the company that I was running was called Building Intrigue, and it was all around being more passionate about the work that you do, which was the learning that I got from that refinery intern experience of that flipped switch, right? Of saying, well, I want to do more than just coast, and how can I help people get into that same state? And so that was what I was really trying to do But I realized that if I hadn't proved the concept, right? I was one person who was able to flip that switch, and I wanted to have conversations with people who had had similar experiences and bring those experiences to an audience that would get get something beneficial from hearing about that.
I love it. How long did you guys end up going for?
I think there were 30 or so episodes. I don't remember the exact number.
Is it something that you still talk about and you still push and you're like, hey, go check out this podcast? Or is it something that you've kind of moved on to the next endeavor and you're like, it's a body of work that you've kind of left?
I would say it's something I've left behind, but I think there were a lot of learnings from that process that allowed me to kind of change the way that I approach business as a whole. So during that time, I had a really tough time defining revenue models, which is something that's probably pretty common in all of the artists and developers and designers that are kind of listening to this podcast. Well, I have an immense amount of talent and I have something to share with the world, but how do I make money from it so that I can eat and it's sustainable and people can continue to enjoy it over time? And I think the one thing that I learned from that process was, well, one, I need to cater to my audience. Two, I need to define the revenue model right off the bat, because starting without that actually made it very, very difficult for me to actually earn money, because you build the expectation that you're going to do things for free over time. And so that was one of the learnings that I had from that. And I think every piece of my career kind of added a new learning and added to that kind of concept of how I build brands today and how I run companies today.
That's awesome. Yeah, I really like that because when we had originally had that conversation about why I should care,
Mm-hmm.
like your podcast, it was something that you said you were like very passionate about, and that's one of the reasons why we actually got into a conversation where you saw that we had launched the lodge and we had this was something that we wanted to do and kind of use as not just for entertainment but also as a resource, kind of bring in professionals, bring in experts in their field, some of the best in Ontario, and really be able to talk to some of these things and some of these issues or concerns or questions that a lot of people in Ontario in the industry or looking to get into the industry have. So I think this is a really interesting conversation that we're going to be able to kind of get into, which we keep kind of teasing it, and I think we'll jump into it now. So I do want to talk about from an outside perspective, what is XR/AR?
Yeah, so the definitions online are always like somewhat conflicting.
Exactly.
So I'm going to go through the whole gamut, right? So we have VR, we have AR, we have MR, and we have XR. So VR to me is, you put on a headset and you're in a world. So everything else is blocked out. All you see is the world that's inside the headset. So you're seeing a 3D environment. You're able to walk through it, but nothing else from the real world is poking through. AR is kind of this. It is the layer on top of a digital world, rather on top of the real world. And typically, when there's kind of like a gray area between AR and MR, where it's kind of like, well, where does AR stop and where does MR start? AR is like, to me, there isn't much integration with the real world. It's kind of just like, okay, I got some information. I can see like a little text thing that says I'm currently in, I don't know, in front of the Eiffel Tower, right? And that's kind of like a little augmentation. And augmentation doesn't necessarily have to be visual either. There can be things like audio augmentation, but it's related to the world, but not so deeply interactive. And then when you get into MR, that's when you start to get into like, what does it look like to have real world objects interface with the digital layer that you've placed on top of it. And then to me, XR is kind of the overarching theme that covers all of those. concepts.
Okay, so XR would be basically like the top of the umbrella and everything kind of fits underneath that.
Exactly.
So XR
Yeah.
can be VR, virtual reality, AR,
Mhm.
which is augmented reality, and then MR would be mixed reality.
That's correct.
Nailed
Yes.
it. First try.
Nicely
Okay.
done.
So
Probably
literally,
should have expanded those acronyms.
oh, that's what I'm here for. That's what we're here for.
Right.
But so XR kind of brings in all of that and kind of encapsulates every
Mhm.
type of reality, essentially.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So you co-owned and you were the technical director of VRcadia, right? So you do
Yeah.
have that core VR experience. So what made you want to go from a headset like Oculus or PSVR
Mhm.
to a phone or glasses or wherever XR Studios is going to be taking you next?
So over the course of VRcadia, there was kind of this interesting story around all of that. So VRcadia was a VR arcade, kind of it's in the name, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
People would come to our location, and they would experience the latest and greatest in VR technology, get to see what new games were out, and we sort of built this community, right? And it wasn't just like gamers. We realized that it expanded much beyond that. So you would see the gamers who would come in and they were like, well, I have a VR headset at home, but I want to decide if I want to buy this new game. So I'm going to try it out here and then go home and buy it if I like it.
Interesting.
And
So like
so that was like an interesting thing to see.
new age blockbuster.
Exactly.
Go and try it out. Awesome.
And so that was like the core function for the gamers who had VR headsets, and then there were the gamers who didn't have VR headsets and they wanted to try VR and see if it would work for them and if they wanted to invest in tech for themselves. But then the more interesting kind of demographics were the community organizations that we worked with. So there was an organization called Hutton House that worked with at-risk youth, and we worked with them to create um, sort of job training and stuff in VR. It wasn't. It was kind of like a mishmash of games that we felt kind of were representative of the types of job skills that you need, just to give them a taste of what it looks like to work in a place. So there was the funny. I don't know if you're familiar with the game Job Simulator,
That
but
was
it's
the first thing I was gonna say. I didn't
yeah.
know if I wanted to make that joke or not. I didn't know how serious we were gonna go with it, but 100% it was like Job Simulator, just things flying everywhere.
Yeah, so I mean, and those kind of experiences at the core, if you really want to win the game of Job Simulator, you
Mm.
actually do have to do the job,
Yep,
right?
100%.
So there was that, but then there was also the entertaining aspect of being able to just throw stuff around,
Yeah.
and that became like a conduit for people to understand what their purpose in life was, and that was like a really exciting thing for us to see how this kind of technology impacts communities.
Wow. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense though, because a lot of people I think kind of have like with XR in general, but with
Mhm.
VR especially, like it's kind of this shrouded in mystery, and
Mhm.
it's I think it's the hardest thing to sell personally.
Yeah.
Is it's an experience, which I think is very overused, but it is. It's one of those things where it's like you can't watch a commercial for a VR headset and understand the actual feeling of being placed in that world. I remember
Mhm.
doing that for the first time at a friend's house with PSVR and playing Super Hot,
Mhm.
and just the slow motion and just the way things kind of interacted with the world. You immediately
Yeah.
realize you're like, this is clearly the future. This is clearly where we're going. But I think there's also a little bit of restriction when it comes to VR, just as
Mhm.
human beings. I think it's the being aware of your surroundings.
Mhm.
So that's why I think XR or AR in particular is so exciting
Mhm.
to me. Is
Yeah.
seeing that a few years ago in school, I ended up doing something on HoloLens. I just had like a
Mhm.
presentation on HoloLens because I thought it was incredibly
Yeah.
interesting. And that's Microsoft's version of that AR and showing Minecraft and being able to do that in the real world while still like not having to catch your bearings or not having to, be blindsided or have those
Mhm.
blinders on. You can kind of experience the world while experiencing these games and these products. It's very, very interesting to me.
Mhm.
With
I realized I didn't answer your question, so I'm actually going to continue the story that
that's what a podcast
that
is
was
for.
on.
You
Yeah.
just Go ahead.
But what you're saying is exactly right, right? Like we're able to kind of you have this awareness of your surroundings, and it's so visceral, right? Like you're kind of able to add things to your real world, and that kind of creates a sense of immersion that's a little bit different. And in my opinion, long term, it will be the thing that kind of holds our attention most. But XR kind of started in a weird way. We started off by installing VR equipment in long-term care homes. So we were helping seniors get to see a life outside of just kind of like being inside of a home. They would go into an experience like Google Earth and fly around the world and go traveling, and that would like bring a big bright smile on their faces, right? And
You
you'd
guys are the
think that
real
like people
MVPs. That's unbelievable.
yeah, you'd think that like, the older generation would be more resistant to technology. They were not. They were like, give me this now. I want to go and check out what my house looks like now because I haven't been back in like 10 years. And they would
Uh,
go back and they'd be like, okay, well, let me go into Street View. And they go into Street View and they can see their house. Oh, they painted the vinyl. It's yellow now. I don't like that color. Um, or like, oh, my neighbor's daughter, that's her, because Google's algorithm forgot to like blur out their face, and you
yep.
can kind of see in the picture that there was someone there, and they're like, I know that person, and kind of giving that excitement. It
Wow.
was a great and very fulfilling feeling. Um, all the while, even during VRcadia, we were talking about, well, what does it look like to add a layer onto the world? Like from VRcadia's perspective, we wanted to create kind of all of these exciting experiences where the characters from the VR games would come out and you could see them on your phone, and they're flying around VRcadia. They're doing little animations, or maybe you can play like a little mini game where you get to experience the content without having to be in the headset. And that was where kind of like the idea of all of this started. And then today, like we're proud to say that we're not just doing that for one building, we're doing that for the entire world.
I think that's a wonderful segue into XR Studios and what you guys are doing. First of all, congratulations on the position of being the CEO.
Thank you.
An incredible accomplishment. But I think this kind of leads into the conversation of what XR Studios is doing. Like you've had this incredible career of stop to stop, and kind of everything is kind of leading you to this point.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very curious to hear of like, what do you guys do, and what is it like working with some of the clients that you work with? I'll let you go into a little more detail before we get into that.
Sounds great. Yeah. So how this all started first, the pandemic hit, and long-term care homes had a priority of keeping their residents safe, and VR became much less of a priority at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And we realized our business model wasn't going to work. And that was when, during this time, we were also building a VR game for senior care, specifically around fall prevention. And we realized every single person who was working on that had the exact skill set that was necessary to build the vision that we'd been covertly talking about for several years now. So we pushed into that, and today what we do is we help cities tell more culturally authentic stories using augmented reality. And augmented reality, I say augmented reality, it's really mixed reality, but people are more familiar with the term augmented reality. So
This
I
is
usually say
where
that.
the confusion comes in for people, because I think
Yeah.
even getting people right now, of course, as IO, we have a bunch of conversations about just getting people into gaming and people getting into VR, AR, like the broadest terms, and explaining the video game industry and like this part of the technology industry is the biggest in the world, and it's getting people to understand that. And now it's VR, XR, AR, and like this is actually this, I think, can be very like intimidating for a lot of people. But you
Yeah,
guys
if you
have,
look at like 4 or 5 different websites online, you'll get 4 or 5 different answers for the delineation between those concepts.
that's why I appreciate that you always use XR, because you, no matter
Yeah.
what, you're covering everything. It's all
Yeah.
encapsulating. It's some
Yeah.
sort of altered reality, with that digital layer on top of it. But please continue. I want to hear more about what XR Studios is actually doing, because you're saying you're talking a lot about the cultural representative stories that you guys are able to do, which is incredibly powerful and, may I say, direly needed. So and I know how important and how close that is to your heart. So if you want to continue on that, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, I think one of the key aspects of what we're doing is that people inherently, like, they don't necessarily explicitly say this, but they inherently understand that the new technologies that we're coming out with, their core purpose cannot just be commerce. There needs to be a discussion around culture and equity and social impact, and supporting each other from the ground up using these technologies. And if nobody's doing that work to begin with, then we're not going to get to a place where that technology seems impact first, which is where we really need to be. So what we do is we work with all sorts of different organizations who have a story to tell, whether that's a museum, a destination like a city, or a theme park, or basically any place that has a story to tell. We work with them, and we work with them to draw attention to their stories in a way that other mediums can't. We work with them to bring people to their location so that there's more awareness, and there's also a way for people to get connected with those stories. And we work with them on a commerce level as well, of being able to, tell that story and have it turn into donations for a museum, or tell that story and have it turn into people going to a main street in their city and spending money at their local businesses and supporting that local economy.
So it definitely seems like it's having that integration and having that like personal tour guide essentially, and you're able to kind of
Yeah.
tell these stories in a way that is representative of the people that want the story to be told.
Yes.
You have that creative power, which is fantastic. And I'm curious to hear, like, can you give a little bit of an example of how that actually works? Like, so if you, let's say you're saying like a theme park or like whichever one you choose, that you,
Sure.
kind of the process of a consumer, of someone like myself going in and being like, oh, this is an XR Studios experience. There's such and such story. And how does that work?
Yeah, so it all kind of starts with a meeting, right? Everything starts with a meeting. You have to talk to people to get their ideas and learn more about them. And so we start with a meeting with someone who has already expressed interest that they want to work with us, and we'll get kind of an understanding of the concept that they want to go with. Usually, the client will have a story that sticks out in their mind. If they don't, then we'll facilitate that discussion and help them get to a point where there is a refined story that they want to tell. And through that process, we'll sort of pitch ideas to them. We'll kind of tell them, here's what you can do and what you can't do in augmented reality. Here's some of our past work. Here are the kinds of interactive games that you can build for your audience. And throughout that process, that client's getting more and more excited. That client's also understanding what's possible and what's not possible. And eventually they get to a refined idea of, here's the concept. So for example, we recently did an experience with Bank Street in Ottawa. And
I'm out of
yeah,
Ottawa, so I just perked up. Continue, please.
you're in Ottawa.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to go and check that out, because
Okay.
it's some of our best work. Yeah.
All right.
So what they wanted to do was they wanted to bring, so Bank Street is a business improvement area. So what they're responsible for is ensuring that the local businesses have enough foot traffic, they're getting what they need, and they're able to sell their wares and make a decent living, because that's what drives kind of society. So we worked with them to create a mural tour. So Bank Street has recently got a massive number of wall murals throughout that region, and they wanted a way to showcase the work that's been done and tell more of the story of that community. And so what we did was we took every single one of their murals and we created an AR experience around it. Every single one is definitely an exaggeration. There were 5 of them.
Yeah. I was like, Bank Street has a lot of art. Like, how big is this project?
So we did 5 murals, and we turned them into these experiences that were games, that were educational, that were interactive and exciting. And we had a huge launch event where we projection mapped an entire building with the content that you would see in the app. And we had hundreds of people attend that launch event, and we had our most successful launch yet. We had lots of individuals basically go and check it out. We saw tons of reviews on our Google reviews and our App Store reviews of people just extremely excited to be able to kind of see their community in a different light.
Absolutely.
So that was kind of like one concept, right? That may not be as story driven, but what we're able to do is kind of give them the building blocks that make an interactive experience a positive one for the end user. And as a result, we had tons of people really have a good time with that content.
And if for nothing else, it's one of those things like you can be incredibly proud of, but you can also use that right in the future of when you have these conversations, being like, look what we were able to do. With this type of an area, like this is what we can do for you. Yeah. So like even as a company, of course, that's like invaluable to be able to get to do work like that. I'm curious, just with stuff like this, I think the thing that's old as time with like humanity is telling stories, right? I think that's what we're best at. I think that's why people are so invested in games and so invested in movies and things like that. It's connecting to characters, connecting to people. Can you speak to a bit of an example of what EXAR has done to actually be able to tell that narrative story and be able to kind of have that speak through technology to people?
Yeah, so there's probably our most relevant example was the work that we did with Banting House, which is a National Historic Site here in London, Ontario. So Sir Frederick Banting was the inventor of insulin. Essentially saved over the course of history several millions of lives just through that discovery. And we were able to tell that story of how Sir Frederick Banting came to the idea. We were able to take his bedroom, which was on the 2nd floor of this museum, and recreate it and place it on the ground level outside, which made it more accessible, more exciting. And the feedback we got was, well, I didn't know that Sir Frederick Banting was also a painter. And in the museum, you can go up to his paintings and you have to keep a certain distance. In AR, you can walk right up to it. And people were thrilled to be able to really interact with that content in a way that was safe to the artifacts, but also truly immersive and made you feel like you were unrestricted in the way that you interact with it.
I think that's a big part of this type of technology that a lot of people don't fully grasp yet, and that some of the real world applications of exactly things like that, and even talking about going into long-term care homes and giving people that experience. It's not, I think when a lot of people hear about games or this type of immersive technology, they think first person shooters, they think Fortnite, they think these type of things. Pokemon Go, I think, is a major thing to maybe kind of, I think it can be used in a positive way to get people to kind of understand more of AR, because then you have that common ground where you're like, okay, this is what it as, and this is a great thing on its own. It got a lot of people outside. That was a heck of a summer. But being able to kind of use that as a touching point and a talking point to be like, yeah, this is what we could do with that technology of exactly being able to tell
Mhm.
stories like that and make it accessible to people that
Yep.
may not have otherwise even been able to go up there, but exactly being
Yep.
able to have that so close you can touch it feeling, right, where you can actually see the details of things that are
Actually,
restricted.
one of the things that I want to touch on based on what you just said was um, sometimes we forget that pop culture is still culture, right? Andy
Oof,
Warhol was a pop culture
deep.
artist. He's a staple of history today,
Yeah.
right? And we don't know what piece of pop culture today is going to be a staple of history tomorrow. And so we need to tell those stories just as much as we tell the stories of yesterday.
And I think this is a new way to do it, and I think it's an exciting
Mhm.
and fun way to do it.
Yeah.
And like you said, when coming to XR, that like why it seems to be like scratching that creative itch is that
Mhm.
it's still so open. There's no um
Yeah.
big dogs in the race, if you will. You know, we have
Yeah.
like, as like a massive gaming fan, like you have your Xbox, your Nintendos, your
Yeah.
Sonys and things like that. But with XR, it's still so open ended, and there's so many places to go. There's no standards, which is, you know, a benefit and can also be problematic depending on where you go with it. But I think it really opens you up that you can kind of there's no standards. Like there's no other way
Yeah.
to say that. That is, it's so open and there's so many different ways you can go where it's like no one's really
Mhm.
done it this way before. You can
Yeah.
kind of create things
You
from
know,
scratch.
Apple and Adobe, they're looking into AR quite deeply, and they're doing all sorts of experimentation, but I don't think they can definitively say that they're ahead or behind of the work that we're doing. And that there's something really empowering about that, to be able to be right on the ground floor of it, on the pioneer level of it, and know that even the biggest companies in the world are facing the same challenges with the medium as we are. And the people who are the most creative, the people who do the right testing and who find the market, are the ones who are going to win, not the ones with the most money.
Which is goes against most technologies, where of course that
Yeah.
you have those bigger companies that kind of
Yeah.
end up scooping them up because
Yeah.
they're not able to do it themselves. But yeah,
Mhm.
you're absolutely right, because as soon as we start to get to a certain point with technologies, it's like, okay, we've almost kind of reached the cusp of this. There's always something coming up behind them, right? And I think XR
Mhm.
is that, where it's,
Mhm.
hey, yes, we have, you know, home consoles and we have all of these amazing technologies that we're kind of starting to
Mhm.
perfect, I think, at this point. And then you're
Yeah.
coming with things like this where it's like it's so open ended and it's so exciting to be at that level, that even level, yeah, with these
Yeah.
$1 trillion companies, where it's like we've actually succeeded in certain ways that you haven't figured out yet, or you know,
Yeah.
things like that. I think that's
I
really
mean,
exciting.
I'm sure there's definitely. I'm not going to pretend we're not the underdog, but
I think
you
having
know what I mean.
billions of
There's
dollars in funding kind of
Yeah, you
benefits
can
them.
throw a
Yes,
lot more people at doing those experiments. So,
yeah, that's fair.
but sometimes quantity isn't uh, the metric. Quality is, right?
Yeah,
So
100%, 100%.
you never know where that innovation will come from.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That's a good way to look at that. So one of the things I do want to kind of get into was you were talking about having all these different clients, right? And this like
Mhm.
entrepreneurial way that you guys have gone about things, where you're really being able to do your own thing. So I just wanted to
Mhm.
kind of talk a little bit about what that experience is like of working with all these different types of clients and it not being standardized. You don't have a set
Mhm.
sector. You're not just working with theme parks, or you're not just working with art. You're kind of touching
Yeah.
on all these different creative bases. So I'm curious to hear I speak a little bit towards that.
Yeah, it's weird because it's kind of like this combination of being a tech company with a clear like strategy on IP and kind of scalability and stuff, but then also being an agency because
Absolutely.
yeah, this content isn't going to, like, at least not within the foreseeable future. It's not going to be some AI-able thing that you can just like extract stories from people who a lot of them are even just, passed down vocally, right? So how do you take those kind of stories? There's no AI that's going to be able to compile them. So there is an aspect of this that is very hands-on and very um, personable. And I think that's an aspect of that I personally really enjoy, talking to our clients and being able to learn about these new stories that you can't find online, that you can't find in a format that is truly authentic to, you know, we do work with indigenous people, and those stories, sure, you can maybe find them on some website, but hearing them from the source and hearing them in the medium of augmented reality, of extended reality, is a very different experience, because those stories that are told, they have been passed down vocally, but they incite a visual experience that is not really comprehensible unless you were either already a part of that community or you see them in the format of extended reality.
Sometimes I just get lost in the things that you're saying. Like, and like you just have that cadence about you, and it's been fun. But yeah, 100%. I 100% agree. One of the things I actually wanted to touch on as well was EXAR as a company. Yeah. Where do you see the future? Of course, with talking about, technology like this, how we're saying it's so open-ended and it's, just really getting off the ground. I'm curious to hear your opinion on, you guys, obviously there's certain things you're not going to touch on, certain things you're not going to, say. But I'm kind of curious of if you can give a bit of a snapshot on like what the future holds for EXAR Studios.
Yeah, I think I'll take more of an industry approach than a specific company approach, because the strategic goals for the company have to pivot a lot right now as a result of the changes in the marketplace. Not because we're unaware but the technology is just changing so fast. There's no way to create a strategy today that will hold true in 2 years. So,
which must be exciting for someone like you.
It's very exciting for me.
You have no idea what the future holds. For a lot of people, it gives us a panic attack, and you're like, "Let's go! Like, let's change it up. Keep it spicy."
So I'm gonna get a little bit esoteric for a moment, and then we'll kind of bring it back down to ground level. But if you look at the way that the direction that the market is moving today, we have Meta, who just did their launch, and we've got players in Apple, in Snapchat, in Niantic, that are all making moves towards this metaverse play. Even Unreal is actually kind of like a quieter contender that I personally think has a better handle on what that looks like, particularly with their work with Fortnite and doing concerts in their game. So that's the kind of stuff that I think we're on a tipping point right now that is on the scale of the discovery of a new country, right? And if we're not careful about the way that we approach the metaverse, the way that we approach this technology going forward, it has the potential to define our social class structure in the future. And that this is the esoteric part that I'm talking about, right? So we need people who are doing really positive work alongside the people who are focused on the commercial outcomes. The commercial outcomes, I think, because of the way that the reward system of our world of capitalism is set up, we often get rewarded more for doing those commercial outcomes, and the people who do the impact work have the potential to change the way that system works. And we need to get to a point where we're using this technology and rewarding the people who solve the biggest challenges with technology on an impact level more than we reward people who are solving the challenges on a commercial level. So that's my little esoteric segue.
No, I understand that. that's fair though, but I think that's something that we're kind of cursed with as humanity, is that we move too quickly sometimes, too far without thinking of like the repercussions of certain things. And I think there's even certain things in the last 10 years, even of course talking with social media, of like that impact, I think has been, social media as a, on the face of it, isn't necessarily bad, but I think without the proper considerations and the proper care put into place, I think it can do a lot of damage. I can only imagine having grown up with social media that wasn't MySpace and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think we need to constantly be aware and take all of these things into consideration when moving forward, because we don't want to be our own
So I'm going to take that abstract concept and then bring it down to a real level now.
Perfect.
So if we think about the internet, right? It's an unlimited landscape of information. But is it an unlimited landscape of information, or is it a landscape of information where you get to be seen because Google's algorithm tells you get to be seen?
So you're saying it is never ending, but it's also kind of has the people in control of it, essentially. Like it's not entirely free.
I would say it's free, but that's not the problem, right? Like I don't think that Google's algorithm is necessarily a bad thing. I think that like we need to be very careful about what the algorithm that defines what version of the metaverse you see is, very, very carefully. Because if it's tuned towards commercial outcomes, that may not lead to a positive social outcome.
I think that's something that we're all pretty familiar with, especially when it comes to, maybe not to that level, but even just you're saying with Google, is like if you search certain things, those are the type of things that you'll see. If you have a certain political view, those are the type of stories and the type of content that will be fed your way. So if there's a certain benefit that companies could get by targeting certain things towards you or towards your demographic, then yeah, you're right. Like it's not entirely free of opinion or free of choice. Like it can be very targeted.
Yep.
So,
but the good thing is, us as the people who are the target audience, I'm not speaking as a company now, I'm speaking as the audience, as the people who experience the worlds that we're creating, and whether that concept's a metaverse or something else, doesn't really matter. We have a choice. I mean, we're battling against certain things that are designed to take advantage of our neurology. But at the end of the day, if we say that we want to see more equitable content, and the algorithm is purely based on what gets seen and viewed more, then we have an opportunity to get content that's much more impactful than just an ad or a sales outcome.
do you think it's dangerous that we do have this kind of dopamine centric overload for so many people? And like that's what a lot of the type of content is usually aimed towards, is triggering that part of your brain where you're constantly getting, pleasure from, like from a million different things, rather than, peace and something that is actually benefiting you as a person and as humanity, rather than just that immediate gratification of, dopamine for the brain.
Yeah, I mean, I won't go too deeply onto the neuroscience of things, just because it's not my domain, but I do know that inherently dopamine is not a bad thing, right? It's the motivation chemical in our brain, and that motivation can be used to make a purchase, or it can be used to incite change, right? And if we can find a way to align those two outcomes, we will see a positive outcome, right? Like that they did a study on rats, like, and I say they, I don't actually know who the researchers are, so
We know what you're talking
me.
about.
Yeah, they.
Oh, that they. Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, that they. So there's too much dopamine, which leads to some to people basically just seeking, the algorithm click, 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 click. And
Doom
then there's two
scrolling.
little doom scrolling. Yeah. And there's too little dopamine, which leads to a lack of motivation to the point that you don't want to eat. You don't want to drink water.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have potentially the right idea with the wrong implementation.
Also,
In the sense that dopamine can be used for good, or it can be used for like not so great things. And if we can find a way to set it up so that you get a dopamine response for caring, for empathy, for positive outcomes, then that's not such a bad thing. With the caveat that dopamine response doesn't happen on a cadence that messes with your neurology. But
yeah,
again,
no,
that's where I start to get out of my depth, right?
yeah, understandably. Same with me. But yeah, I find that kind of conversation like very interesting for me, especially being someone who's so into, like we spend every day in front of our screens, like very much in the technology base, that I think it's something that we're uniquely exposed to on a constant basis. And I think that dopamine can definitely be a benefit. Of course, and like you're saying, like things like caring and things like, empathy for people. But I think for the way it's kind of been set up right now is that's not the easiest way to get dopamine. Do you know what I mean? Like
No.
if you just scroll through Instagram and you have a feed that's catered towards you, those are little bits of dopamine that are constantly triggering, which can actually end up having a negative effect on you. And like I've even noticed that in myself. If I spend an hour on social media just kind of scrolling and doing my thing, I'm not as engaged and fully committed to whatever else I'm doing for the rest of the day. And I don't know what that is about me says about me as a person, but like there is a good and a bad to it. And I think too much of anything is a problem.
Yeah.
So like you're saying, we can kind of target it.
I don't think there's, with the current algorithm, I will tell you that getting out of that scenario is like pretty near impossible, right? Because
it's too beneficial for the companies.
It's too beneficial for the companies, and it's too easy to get the dopamine response, and it's too well tuned to create that response. And I spent a day without my phone recently, and I literally felt like I was feeling withdrawal symptoms, right? Because you get accustomed to that response, and your brain craves it to a certain degree.
It's just inherent in us. Now this is a whole other conversation, but yeah, like it's just one of those things that like it's so ingrained, and I think that's a problem.
There may be sections of this that I need to cut so that I don't seem like I'm talking about something I don't know about. So
totally fair. But I think like most people kind of have those thoughts in those conversations. I don't think we're getting like too into the weeds with anything, but it's that inherent, reaction to things. And I think there's ways that we can use that type of technology, like with what XR is doing, and being able to kind of tell, kind of bringing it back around to the narrative, being able to kind of tell those stories and be able to use a technology that we think might be not benefiting in the ways that it could be, and then be able to implement that same type of technology or an iteration on it to something that is benefiting society and our communities and our families, and being able to tell those type of authentic stories using the technology that I think a lot of people are nervous of or kind of shy away from. I think this is a great way to get people in and invested in it. To say, hey, this is, I know something that you're not entirely comfortable with, but these are some of the applications. And I think you have that perfect selling point of talking about bringing things into long-term care homes. Like that's something I'm going to keep going back to, because that's, to me, like I'm very, very blessed. And like my grandparents right now are both 91, and what they could benefit from that and the type of experiences and the world that they could see and our world that they could see is like, it really speaks to me. Being someone who, of course, like most, like love my family. So it's my first thought is like what that could do for them is just incredible. And I think, being able to use that as a touch point for people. Hey, we can show them their childhood homes, or we can do this, we can do that. This technology is used for good. And I think that's going to do nothing but kind of raise us.
Yeah. I also think that like, with augmented reality and mixed reality, the positive is that everything is rooted in the real world, right? And I think if we're not careful again, there is the possibility of that dystopian future where everyone's in a VR headset and stops caring about their own real world, right? And I think rooting some of these technologies inside of the real world and telling these cultural stories and being able to connect with people and understand each other better is a much better application of the technology than um, some of the other proposed applications.
As a big entertainment fan, I just immediately go to, Sword Art Online or Ready Player One, things like that.
Yeah,
Where it's
if you watch the movie, like that, their lives are not great.
Yeah, this is not
outside
good.
of the metaverse.
Yeah, it's not a full escape that anyone should have.
Yeah.
So I think the last thing we'll talk about, because I do always appreciate doing this with guests and with just people since working at IO, is most of your career has taken place between London and Toronto. I'm curious as to why stay there, like why have you focused in on this area, and why not like other places in Canada or other places around the world? Because with your kind of expertise and your resume and experience, I feel like you could get a job, in like a bigger company about something like this. What speaks to you so much about staying where you are and kind of, doing these grassroots projects and building up these companies?
Yeah, I think there's a few different reasons for that. I can't root it down to like one single thing. From the course of my life, I would say that I was born and raised in London, Ontario. So there is a certain attachment to the hometown. Secondly, like it's not like I wasn't applying for jobs outside of Ontario when I got out of university. I was looking all over the place. But Ontario was the gift that kept on giving, and there is opportunity here, right? So sometimes I think that we don't give ourselves enough credit, and I think that there's a lot more opportunity here than we initially think about. Like people run off to Silicon Valley because they want to be a software engineer, but there's lots of amazing companies in Toronto, right? There's lots of amazing companies in London, Ontario that are doing things that are equally exciting. Maybe you don't get paid as much as you do in Silicon Valley, but your rent's probably a lot less. So
it's a good way to look at it. Absolutely. Yep.
So I'm not convinced that the benefit of leaving is as high as people think it is. There might still be some benefit, but and then it also comes down to throughout like my childhood, my time in university, and with friends from Toronto, people always gave me London's like a terrible city. It's not worth living there. It's not worth spending time there. And to a certain degree, I'm the type of person that likes to prove people wrong. And I think there's a lot here. And I think that if people wanted to make, and this goes for any place, if you want to make a place your own, you have the opportunity. It's all up to you.
That definitely speaks to me. I've like been rooted in Ottawa my whole life, and I was recently given the opportunity to move to Toronto, and I chose to stay here because I felt like I had done the work that I wanted to do here. Because of course you have that hometown attachment, and it's like if I could bring positivity, or I can bring something good to my hometown, like that's a feeling like no other. Well, like you're saying, like there's so many amazing places in Ontario, and of course we have the meccas of Toronto, but even like our first guest actually on the podcast was Danielle Sokolowski from Digital Extremes, right? And they're also based in London.
Londoners.
And it was something that she was really proud of, and she's like, what we're like being a part of this community and being a part of this city is something that she's very, very proud of. And you kind of grow that attachment, especially like you're saying, like proving people wrong, where it's almost people like, oh, hey, like, why don't you go to Toronto, or oh, why don't you go to, Waterloo or something like that? And it's like, no, like I like being here. I'm proud of here. and I want to
Yeah.
continue to stay here and help it grow and help it benefit, right?
There has been massive change in London, Ontario in the past 5 years. Like Tech Alliance has made it's so much easier for startups to start here and to find funding. There are new funds that are opening every year in London, Ontario, and I think that if you're here and you're thinking about starting something, don't run off to Silicon Valley too fast, because there are people here that are going to support you.
Because that definitely helps, right? You build these companies out, and then that kind of spreads throughout the community as you have all these people with now this expertise that they can, help blossom their own new projects or, join new teams. I think that'll about do it for this episode. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on, or anything that went left unsaid?
I think what really went left unsaid was thank you to Interactive Ontario, because the opening to a community of people that like just get it, has been a huge blessing to be able to connect with people and get mentorship and learn about other people's ventures and support each other. That's what's really going to help some of those positive outcomes that we talked about throughout the rest of the conversation actually happen. It's not going to be a cutthroat, competitive, dog eat dog world. It's going to be small companies supporting one another until they're big companies, and then continuing to support each other until positive change has happened.
Thank you. I did not ask you to say that. I just need that to be known. It has been the most fulfilling part of my career. I do really enjoy working in Rock, Ontario, and getting able to meet people like you and have these kind of conversations, and launch the initiative like the Lodge, which again, this is the Lodge podcast episode 2. And I would love to have you back. When EXAR is going to I know they're just changing the game in Ontario, and it's something that I'm incredibly excited to see, and I now understand a lot more about. So thank you for that. Thank you to our audience for listening. Please message us, LinkedIn, Twitter, the website, anywhere you want to find us, and let us know who else you would like, what you like, didn't like, things we want to change. We're always adapting and we're always listening. And as I just want to really thank you for your time, your expertise, your dedication to not only the technology, but to this province that we both love so dearly. Thank you to Interactive Ontario and Ontario Creates for their support. And we'll see you all next time. Take care, everybody.
Thanks a lot.